There are moments in your life that arrive disguised as something ordinary. They were the camouflage of a Tuesday afternoon or the quiet hum of a refrigerator in a sleeping house. They do not announce themselves with thunder or lightning, but with a subtle shift in the air, a change in the pressure of a room. You only recognize them in retrospect, when you trace the map of your life backward and find the exact spot where the landscape changed, where the river of your existence carved a new and unexpected path. For me, that moment was the soft click of a hotel room door latching shut, a sound so small it was nearly swallowed by the silence. Yet it was the loudest thing I had ever heard. It was the sound of a boundary dissolving, a question being asked without a single word, and I knew, even then, as I watched him stand there in the dim light from the hallway, that nothing would ever be the same. He stood there, framed by the doorway, a silhouette against the garish, patterned carpet of the hotel corridor. Leo. His shoulders were slumped, not in defeat, but in a kind of profound weariness that seemed to have settled deep into his bones. The wedding we had just endured, a loud, glittering affair celebrating my ex-girlfriend, Clara, and her new husband, had wrung every last drop of social energy from both of us. He was still in his suit, but the tie was gone, stuffed into a pocket, and the top two buttons of his crisp white shirt were undone, revealing the faint, tanned line of his throat. He looked less like the confident, gregarious software consultant I knew and more like a traveler who had finally reached the end of a very long and arduous road. He was looking at me, his eyes dark and unreadable in the low light, and his hand was still resting on the doorknob of his own room, directly across the hall. He hadn't turned it. "Just for tonight," he had said, his voice a low murmur that barely carried across the space between our doors. It wasn't a question, but it felt like one. It felt like a plea. The silence in these rooms is too loud, and I, without a moment of the overanalysis that usually governed my every decision, had simply stepped back, opening my door wider in invitation. An invitation for him to cross a threshold that was more than just physical. He had given me the excuse, the plausible deniability we both seemed to require, and I had accepted it without hesitation. Now, he was inside my room, and the door was closed. The world was reduced to this small, anonymous space. 2 queen beds with stiff white comforters, a bland painting of a seascape on the wall, and the faint, antiseptic smell of industrial cleaner. But with him in it, the room felt charged, alive, like the air before a storm. He didn't move toward his designated bed. Instead, he walked over to the wide window and looked out at the sprawling, indifferent lights of the city below, his reflection a ghostly twin superimposed over the night. I watched him, my heart a frantic, trapped bird against my ribs. I was a photographer by trade, a professional observer. My life was spent behind a lens, capturing moments, framing emotions, finding the story in the stillness of an image. I was accustomed to watching, to noticing the minute details, the way a person's hand unconsciously clenches when they're nervous, the subtle tightening around their eyes when they're trying not to feel something, the way light catches on a stray strand of hair. I had spent the better part of a year watching Leo, cataloging 1,000 such details, storing them away in the private, carefully guarded gallery of my mind. I knew the way his smile started in his eyes a full second before it reached his lips. I knew the specific cadence of his laugh, when he found something genuinely funny versus when he was just being polite. I knew the way he ran a hand through his dark hair when he was wrestling with a problem, pushing it back from his forehead as if to clear a path for the solution. But watching him now, in the charged intimacy of this room, felt different. It felt like I was looking at the negative of a photograph I had not yet developed, seeing the potential for an image so powerful it terrified me. To understand the weight of that moment, the sheer, terrifying gravity of that clicked door, you have to understand the foundation upon which our friendship was built. It was a structure I had come to rely on, a shelter in the often lonely landscape of my life. And like any structure you cherish, the thought of its collapse was unbearable. We had met, of all places, at that wedding. Clara's wedding. My attendance was a strange act of penance and closure. We had ended things years ago, amicably, a slow and gentle drifting apart rather than a violent schism. We remained friends, the kind who sent birthday texts and liked each other's social media posts, existing in the comfortable, low-stakes periphery of each other's lives. When the thick, cream-colored invitation had arrived, embossed with gold lettering, I felt a bizarre obligation to go, to bear witness to the final, formal closing of that chapter. It was like visiting a house you used to live in, just to see the new furniture. The wedding was exactly as I'd expected, beautiful, expensive, and suffocatingly joyful. I felt like a ghost at the feast, an artifact from a previous era of the bride's life. I navigated the cocktail hour with a fixed, polite smile, nursing a glass of champagne I had no intention of finishing. And then I saw him. He was standing near the grand, ridiculously ornate ice sculpture of a swan, looking just as out of place as I felt. He was a friend of the groom, I'd later learn, a college roommate dragged across the country for the occasion. While everyone else was mingling with practiced ease, he was watching the crowd with a look of detached amusement, a subtle irony playing on his lips. Our eyes met across the sea of pastel dresses and dark suits, a brief, shared acknowledgement of our mutual outsider status. Later, we found ourselves exiled to the same corner of the patio, seeking refuge from the relentless beat of the dance music. He introduced himself as Leo, and I as Julian. We fell into the easy, unguarded conversation that can only happen between two strangers with no expectations of one another. We talked about the absurdity of ice sculptures, the questionable song choices of the DJ, and the strange social rituals of weddings. He was a consultant, he told me, which meant he spent most of his life in airports and hotel rooms, selling complex software solutions to companies that probably didn't need them. He spoke about his job with a dry, self-deprecating wit that I found instantly appealing. He made his life of constant motion sound both glamorous and profoundly lonely. I told him I was a photographer, and his entire demeanor shifted. The detached amusement was replaced by a genuine, focused curiosity. He didn't ask the usual, polite questions about what kind of camera I used or if I shot weddings. Instead, he asked me what I saw. When you look at all this, he gestured to the swirling party inside. What do you see? Not as Clara's ex, but as a photographer, the question disarmed me. No one had ever asked me that before. I found myself telling him the truth. I told him I saw stories in the small gestures. The bride's father nervously adjusting his tie, a bridesmaid forcing a smile while her eyes looked sad, two elderly relatives holding hands under the table. I told him that I felt the world was made up of these quiet, overlooked moments, and my job was to simply be still enough to notice them. He listened, truly listened, his gaze fixed on me, making me feel as though I were the only person in that entire, sprawling venue. That night, something clicked into place between us. It was a friendship born of circumstance, but sustained by a genuine and immediate connection. After the wedding, we exchanged numbers, and what I expected to be a polite, one-time text exchange blossomed into a daily conversation. He would send me pictures of airport terminals from different time zones, captioned with some wry observation. I would send him photos I'd taken that day, a study of light on a crumbling brick wall or the face of a stranger on the subway. We were building a bridge of shared observations across the distance that often separated us. When he was in town, we would meet for drinks at a quiet bar or just walk through the city for hours, talking about everything and nothing. He was a force of nature, a whirlwind of energy and ideas that was the perfect counterpoint to my quiet, observational stillness. He pulled me out of my shell, out of the solitary world of my darkroom and my own head. With him, I felt seen in a way I hadn't with anyone else, not even with Clara. He didn't just see the calm, composed exterior I presented to the world. He seemed to see the complex, churning interior, and he wasn't intimidated by it. He was fascinated by it. The precise moment my feelings for him shifted, the moment friendship began to curdle into something deeper and far more dangerous, is hard to pinpoint. It wasn't a single event, but a slow, creeping dawn. Perhaps it was the time he called me from a hotel in Tokyo at 3 in the morning his time, not because he needed anything, but just because he'd seen a neon sign that reminded him of a photograph I'd shown him, and he wanted to hear my voice. Or maybe it was the afternoon we spent at a museum, when he stood for 10 minutes in front of a Rothko painting, utterly silent, and then turned to me and said, "This is what your photographs feel like." Like I could step right into them. He understood my language, the visual, emotional dialect I used to communicate with the world. But if I had to choose one moment, one frame to hang on the wall, it would be a rainy Tuesday night. He had just gotten back from a brutal 2-week trip, and he showed up at my apartment, unannounced, looking utterly drained. He didn't say much, just collapsed onto my worn leather sofa and closed his eyes. I made us tea, and we sat in comfortable silence, listening to the rain drum against the window panes. After a while, he started talking about the trip, the endless meetings, the sterile hotel rooms, the crushing loneliness of it all. As he spoke, he reached out and casually rested his hand on my knee. It was an absent-minded gesture, a simple point of contact, likely meaning nothing more to him than a way to ground himself. But for me, it was an electric shock. A current of warmth spread from that single point of contact through my entire body. It was a simple, platonic touch, but in that moment, I realized with sickening clarity that I wanted it to be more. I wanted to cover his hand with my own. I wanted to lean into his space, to close the distance between us. I wanted to feel the weight of his head on my shoulder. The realization terrified me. Our friendship had become the central pillar of my emotional life. It was a safe harbor, a place of unconditional acceptance and easy companionship. To introduce the volatile, unpredictable element of romantic desire felt like taking a lit match to the blueprints of the only home I had. I was certain he didn't feel the same way. He was all easy charm and casual confidence. He dated beautiful, interesting women in short, intense bursts before his travel schedule inevitably got in the way. I was the quiet friend, the stable constant in his peripatetic life. To him, I was a brother, a confidant, a safe place. To risk that, to gamble the most important relationship I had on the slim, foolish hope that he might see me as something more, was a form of madness I could not afford. So I did what I did best. I observed my own feelings from a distance. I photographed them in my mind, developed them in the darkroom of my solitude, and then filed them away, locked in a drawer I promised myself I would never open. I became a masterful custodian of my own secret. This carefully constructed dam of self-preservation held for months. I maintained the boundaries, policed my own thoughts, and played my part as the supportive, platonic friend. And then came the catalyst. It wasn't a dramatic explosion, but a slow, structural failure in Leo's own life. His latest whirlwind romance, with a sharp, ambitious lawyer named Isabel, ended abruptly. It was his longest relationship in years, and he had, I think, allowed himself to hope for something more permanent. Her reason for ending it was the one he always heard. His life was too transient. He was never fully present, always one foot out the door on his way to the next airport. This time, however, the criticism landed differently. It hit a nerve he hadn't known was exposed. He didn't call me in a panic. He didn't show up drunk at my door. He just started to appear. He'd text me on a Thursday afternoon, "In your neighborhood. Want to grab a coffee?" And then the coffee would turn into a 3-hour conversation. He started leaving things at my apartment: a book, a stray sweatshirt, a phone charger. Small, territorial markers I tried not to read into. He was seeking comfort, I told myself. He was lonely and hurt, and my apartment, my presence, had become his default sanctuary. It was my job, as his friend, to provide that without question. But his need for comfort began to manifest in ways that blurred the carefully drawn lines I had established for myself. It began with the movie nights. He would come over, ostensibly to watch a film, but his attention would drift. He wasn't watching the screen. He was watching the space around him, absorbing the quiet stability of my home. The first time he fell asleep on my couch, my heart hammered in my chest. He was just so completely unguarded. His face relaxed in a way I rarely saw. The lines of stress around his eyes smoothed away. I felt an overwhelming urge to reach out and brush the hair from his forehead, a gesture so tender, and so forbidden that my hand actually twitched at my side. Instead, I carefully draped a soft woolen blanket over him, my fingers brushing his shoulder for a fraction of a second. The contact was brief, accidental, but it sent a jolt through me. I retreated to my room, my mind racing, leaving him to the safety of the living room, a space that was becoming increasingly charged with unspoken things. This became our new ritual. Leo would come over, we would talk, and eventually, the exhaustion of his week, of his life, would catch up with him, and he would drift off on the couch. I would cover him with the blanket, and the brief, almost imperceptible touch would be enough to sustain my secret hope for days. I was living on crumbs, and I was starving. The ritual escalated one night when he was running a fever. He'd come straight from the airport, looking pale and wrecked. He insisted he was fine, but halfway through a bowl of soup I'd made him, a shiver ran through his body. I insisted he shouldn't go home, and he was too weak to argue. The couch seemed inadequate, so I set him up in my spare room, a small space that mostly served as storage for my camera equipment. I gave him water and medicine and left him to sleep. But a few hours later, I heard him stirring. I found him in the hallway, wrapped in a duvet, his teeth chattering. "It's so cold in there," he mumbled, his voice thick with sleep and illness. "My room, it's warmer. I don't want to be alone right now." Every alarm bell in my head was screaming. This was a line. A clear, definitive line. But looking at him, so vulnerable and miserable, my resolve crumbled. The architect of my own emotional safety was suddenly willing to demolish the entire structure for the sake of his comfort. "Okay," I heard myself say, my voice sounding distant and calm. "Come on." I led him into my bedroom. My room was my sanctum, the most private space in my life. And now he was in it. I pointed him to one side of the queen-sized bed, and I took the other, maintaining a careful, deliberate distance between us. I lay on my back, staring at the ceiling, hyper-aware of every single thing. The sound of his breathing, the rustle of the sheets as he shifted, the faint scent of his soap, the heat radiating from his body across the small gulf that separated us. It was exquisite torture. I felt like an astronomer who had spent his life studying a distant star through a telescope, and now, suddenly, that star was in his bedroom, burning so brightly it threatened to blind him. I didn't sleep at all that night. The illness passed, but the new precedent had been set. The couch was tacitly retired. When Leo was too exhausted to go home, which was happening with increasing frequency, the unspoken destination was my bed. We never talked about it. In the morning, he would be up early, all business and easy charm again, thanking me for letting him crash, as if he'd slept on a lumpy sofa. He gave us both the out, the plausible deniability. We were just two friends. One had a stressful job. The other had a spare side of a bed. It was practical, efficient, and it was a complete and utter fiction. Each night he stayed was a masterclass in tension and restraint. We would lie there, side by side in the dark, sometimes talking quietly about our day, but more often just existing in the shared silence. The space between us became a character in itself, a living, breathing entity. It was a canyon I desperately wanted to cross, but I was terrified of the fall. I would lie perfectly still, my muscles aching with the effort of not moving, of not accidentally brushing his hand, of not turning over and closing that final, impossible inch. I would listen to the rhythm of his breathing, trying to match my own to it, creating a fragile, temporary synchronicity in the dark. I wondered if he felt it too, this unbearable, beautiful tension. Or was it all in my head? Was I the only one who felt like the air in the room was thick enough to hold, crackling with a static charge that was waiting for a ground? I was a photographer obsessed with a single subject, taking the same picture night after night, hoping that one day, the image would finally reveal its true meaning. This brings us back to that hotel room, after Clara's wedding. The night that started it all, and the night that would end our careful charade. After Leo had stood at the window for what felt like an eternity, he finally turned around. His face was shadowed, but I could see the exhaustion etched into it. The wedding had been a uniquely difficult experience for both of us. For me, it was the finality of it, the closing of a door to a past I was already long past. For him, It was a stark reminder of his own romantic failures, a celebration of the kind of stability that felt increasingly out of his reach. He had spent the evening projecting a cheerful, unbothered facade, but I could see the cracks in it. He looked at the two beds in the room, pristine and identical. He looked at me, and then he did something that broke the pattern of all our previous nights. He walked over to my bed, the one I was sitting on the edge of, and sat down beside me. Not close enough to touch, but close enough that I could feel the dip in the mattress, could feel the warmth of his body in the space between us. The air, already charged, became thick with an almost unbearable voltage. "Thank you for this, Julian," he said, his voice low and rough. He wasn't looking at me, but at his own hands, which were clasped loosely between his knees. I couldn't face that empty room tonight. It felt hostile. "It's fine, Leo. You know that," I replied, my own voice steadier than I felt. I was trying to keep to the script, to maintain the fiction of practicality. He shook his head slowly. "No, it's not fine. It's a lot to ask. I've been asking a lot of you lately." He finally turned his head and looked at me, and his eyes were filled with a raw, unguarded vulnerability that I had never seen before. It was the look of a man who was done pretending, who was too tired to keep up the performance. "Why are you so good to me?" he asked, and the question was so simple, so direct, that it knocked the air from my lungs. I had 1,000 answers. "Because you're my best friend. Because I can't stand to see you hurting. Because you're the most alive person I know, and I feel more alive just by being near you. Because I am hopelessly, irrevocably in love with you." I said none of them. I simply held his gaze and said the only thing I could, the only thing that felt true and safe enough. "Because you're my friend." The word friend hung in the air between us, suddenly feeling flimsy and inadequate, like a paper umbrella in a hurricane. He held my gaze for a long moment, and I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Disappointment? Resignation? I couldn't be sure. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, as if accepting a verdict. Then he sighed, a deep, weary sound, and lay back on the bed, flinging an arm over his eyes. "I'm so tired," he mumbled from behind his arm. "So tired of everything." I stayed sitting on the edge of the bed, a silent guardian, my back to him. The minutes stretched out, filled only by the low hum of the hotel's air conditioning and the sound of his steadying breath. I thought he had fallen asleep. I was about to get up, to move to the other bed and re-establish the familiar, safe distance of our ritual. But then, his voice came out of the darkness, quiet and tentative. "Julian." "Yeah," I said, my heart leaping into my throat. There was a long pause. I could feel him debating with himself, wrestling with a thought. I waited, holding my breath. "Would you?" He started, then stopped. He took a deep breath. "Would it be okay if I kissed you?" The world stopped. The humming air conditioner, the distant city traffic, the frantic beating of my own heart. It all went silent. It was as if the universe was holding its breath, waiting for my answer. The question was not a proposition. It was not born of desire in the way I understood it. It was a question born of a desperate need for connection, for something real in a world of transient hotel rooms and meaningless cocktail parties. It was a plea for an anchor in a storm. And it was the most terrifying and beautiful question I had ever been asked. My meticulously constructed dam, the one I had spent so long reinforcing, didn't just crack. It was obliterated. All my carefully guarded feelings, all my secret hopes, rushed out in a single, overwhelming flood. I couldn't speak. My throat had closed up, so I simply turned my body toward him. He had lowered his arm, and he was watching me, his eyes wide and uncertain in the dim light filtering through the window. I saw the fear in them, the fear of rejection, the fear of having crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. And in that moment, all my own fear vanished, replaced by an urgent, overwhelming need to make him feel safe, to show him that he had not made a mistake. I leaned in, slowly, giving him every opportunity to pull away, to stop me. He didn't move. He just watched me come closer, his breath hitching. When our lips met, it wasn't a spark. It was a quiet, deep, and profound sense of coming home. It was gentle. It was tentative. It was less a kiss and more a confirmation, an answer to a question we had both been too afraid to ask. It was the taste of salt from unshed tears, the faint hint of whiskey from the wedding reception, and the undeniable, unmistakable feeling of rightness. It lasted only a few seconds, but it contained the entire history of our friendship, all the unspoken words, all the stolen glances, all the carefully maintained distances. When we pulled away, we just looked at each other, our faces inches apart in the dark. No one spoke. There was nothing to say. The silence that had once been a chasm between us was now a bridge. It was a shared space, filled not with tension, but with a fragile, trembling peace. He reached out and his fingers gently brushed my cheek, a touch so light it was barely there, but it grounded me, made the moment real. He didn't pull his hand away, and I didn't move from his side of the bed. We fell asleep like that, facing each other, his hand resting on my cheek, the few inches between our bodies finally, irrevocably, closed. The morning after was a brutal return to reality. I woke first, to the pale, gray light of dawn filtering into the room. Leo was still asleep, his face turned toward me, looking younger and more peaceful than I had ever seen him. His hand was no longer on my cheek, but it was resting on the pillow near my head, a silent testament to the night before. For a few blissful moments, I allowed myself to believe. I let the hope I had suppressed for so long bloom in the quiet of the morning. I watched him breathe, memorizing the shape of his mouth, the way his eyelashes rested against his skin. I felt a tenderness so profound it was a physical ache in my chest. This, I thought. This is it. Then, his eyes fluttered open. He looked at me, and for a split second, I saw the same soft vulnerability from the night before. But then, recognition dawned, and it was followed swiftly by something else. Panic. A shudder came down, swift and decisive. The open, unguarded man from the night before was gone, and in his place was a stranger wearing Leo's face. He sat up abruptly, putting a physical distance between us. He ran a hand through his hair, that familiar gesture, but this time it wasn't thoughtful. It was anxious. He started, his voice raspy. He didn't finish the sentence. He swung his legs out of bed, his back to me. I've got an early call. Should get back to my room. Shower. The words came out in a rush, a series of justifications that I hadn't asked for. Leo, I said, my voice quiet. He didn't turn around. Last night, he began, and my heart seized. I was not myself. The wedding, everything. I'm sorry if I made things weird. The phrase was like a slap. He was reducing the most honest moment of my life to a drunken, post-wedding mistake. He was erasing it, packing it away as an anomaly, a deviation from the norm. He grabbed his discarded tie and the jacket he'd slung over a chair and walked to the door without looking at me again. I'll see you back home, he said, his hand on the doorknob. And then he was gone. The door clicked shut, the same sound as the night before, but this time it was the sound of a wall being erected, a boundary being brutally redrawn. I was left alone in the silent room, the indentation of his body on the mattress beside me the only proof that any of it had happened at all. The hope that had bloomed so brightly just moments before withered and died, leaving behind the cold, gray ash of humiliation. I had misinterpreted everything. I had been a port in a storm, a convenient comfort, nothing more. And in my foolishness, I had risked our friendship, the one thing I couldn't bear to lose. The days that followed were a special kind of hell. The silence from Leo was absolute. My texts, at first casual and then increasingly anxious, went unanswered. My calls went straight to voicemail. It was a ghosting of the highest order, made all the more painful by the depth of the connection I thought we'd had. The silence was a roaring vacuum, sucking all the air and color out of my world. I replayed that night in the hotel room over and over in my mind. A photographer examining a flawed print, searching for the exact moment the image had been ruined. Had I been too eager? Had I leaned in too quickly? Had my own desperate longing been so palpable it had repulsed him? My apartment, once my sanctuary, felt like a prison. Every object he had left behind, the book on my nightstand, the sweatshirt draped over my desk chair, was a tiny monument to my own stupidity. His presence had so completely permeated my space that his absence was a physical presence, a cold draft that I couldn't escape. I felt the familiar loneliness I had known before him creeping back in, but this time it was sharper, colder, laced with the bitter poison of rejection. I had opened the door to my most vulnerable self, and he had not just walked away, he had slammed it shut in my face. After a week of this agonizing silence, something inside me shifted. The hurt and humiliation began to curdle into a slow-burning anger. An anger at him for his cowardice, but also an anger at myself for allowing my own fear to render me passive. I had let him define what had happened between us with his silence. I had let him frame our moment of connection as my moment of misinterpretation. The quiet observer in me was done observing. If our friendship was truly over, if it had been built on such fragile foundations that a single, honest kiss could shatter it, then I deserved to hear it from him. I deserved more than a ghost. I found him at his apartment. I had a key, one he had given me months ago for emergencies. I let myself in. The place was neat, impersonal, always looking like it was packed and ready for the next trip. He was in the kitchen, staring into the open refrigerator as if it held the answers to the universe. He was still in his work clothes, his shoulders slumped. He looked just as weary as he had that night at the hotel. He didn't seem surprised to see me. He just closed the refrigerator door and leaned against it, his arms crossed over his chest. A defensive posture. "We need to talk," I said, my voice more steady than I felt. "Julian, I'm really not," he started. "No." I cut him off, a sharpness in my tone that surprised us both. "You don't get to do that. You don't get to come into my life, into my home, into my bed, and then just vanish because you're scared. I deserve more than that." He winced, the words hitting their mark. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He just stared at a point on the floor somewhere between us. "Just tell me what it was, Leo," I continued, my voice softening slightly. The anger was just a shield for the hurt underneath. "If it was a mistake, if you were just lonely and I was just there, then just say it. I can take it. I can. But you have to say it. This silence. This is cruel. And you are not a cruel person." That finally made him look at me. His eyes were shadowed, filled with a conflict so profound it was painful to witness. I saw the confident, charming man he showed the world completely stripped away, leaving only the lost, lonely traveler I had caught glimpses of in the quiet moments. "What if I don't know what it was?" he whispered, his voice cracking. "What if it wasn't a mistake, and that's what terrifies me?" And there it was. The truth. Not the one I had feared, but one far more complex and heartbreaking. He wasn't running from me. He was running from himself. He finally broke. The dam of his own carefully constructed composure burst, and everything came pouring out. He paced the small kitchen as he talked, running his hands through his hair, a caged animal. He told me about the crushing loneliness of his life, the feeling of being a perpetual guest in other people's cities, other people's lives. He talked about Isabel, and how her leaving had confirmed his deepest fear, that he was incapable of building anything that lasted. "And then there's you," he said, stopping his pacing to face me. "You're the only thing that's felt real, the only thing that's felt permanent. My friendship with you is my anchor, Julian. It's the only home I feel like I have." His eyes were pleading with me to understand. "When I kissed you, it wasn't a mistake. It was the most honest thing I've done in years. And that's why I panicked. Because it felt like I was setting fire to the only house I've ever had. I couldn't lose you. And I was so afraid that this new feeling, would burn everything to the ground." He was afraid of the same thing I had been, losing the friendship. But where I had responded with quiet resignation and secret keeping, he had responded with panicked flight. He was the unknowing initiator, the one who had pushed the boundary without understanding the consequences. And when those consequences became real, he had retreated to what he knew: motion, distance, the safety of the airport terminal. I closed the distance between us, stepping into his space. I didn't touch him. I just stood there, letting him see that I wasn't going anywhere. "You think a feeling that honest could destroy us?" I asked softly. "Leo, look at us. You're running, your silence. That almost destroyed us. The honesty." That's the only thing that can save us. He looked at me, really looked at me, and for the first time, I didn't see fear in his eyes. I saw a flicker of hope, a tentative, fragile thing, but it was there. He took a hesitant step toward me. I don't know how to do this, he confessed, his voice barely a whisper. I've never felt this for a friend, for a man, for anyone really. It's new territory. I don't have a map, so we'll draw one together, I said. We'll be clumsy. We'll get it wrong. We'll probably take a few wrong turns. But we'll do it together. I finally allowed myself the touch I had denied myself for so long. I reached out and gently took his hand. His fingers curled around mine, a desperate, grateful grip. No more running, no more running, he repeated, the words of vow. And in the quiet of his sterile, temporary apartment, we began to build something new. Not on the ashes of our friendship, but on its solid, unshakable foundation. The aftermath of that confrontation was not a sudden, cinematic explosion of romantic bliss. It was quieter, more tentative than that. It was a process of careful, deliberate reconstruction. We had demolished the old structure of our relationship, with its unspoken rules and hidden feelings, and now we had to build a new one, brick by honest brick. The first few days were filled with a gentle, awkward grace. We were like two people learning a new language, fumbling with the grammar of a different kind of intimacy. A hand held for a moment too long in the grocery store aisle, a glance that lingered with a new weight, the shared, nervous smile when we realized we were both thinking the same thing. The real change happened back in my apartment, the space that had been the stage for our entire silent drama. He came over a few nights after our talk. There was no pretext of a movie, no excuse of exhaustion. He was just there to be with me. As the evening wore on and the city lights began to glitter outside my window, a familiar, comfortable quiet settled over us. But it was a different kind of quiet now. The tension was gone, replaced by a soft, humming warmth. When it was time to go to bed, there was a moment of shared hesitation at my bedroom door, a silent acknowledgement of the threshold's new meaning. I walked in first, and when I turned back, he was standing there, in the doorway, just as he had been in that hotel room. But this time, there was no uncertainty in his eyes. There was only a quiet, steady question. I didn't step back to invite him in. I reached out my hand. He took it, and his fingers laced with mine. He stepped across the threshold, and we walked to the bed together. That night, we slept in each other's arms. There was no chasm of unspoken fear between us, no carefully measured inches of propriety. There was just the solid, reassuring weight of his body against mine, the feeling of his steady heartbeat against my back, his arm draped possessively over my waist. It was a sleep so deep and peaceful it felt like a healing. I had spent so many nights lying next to him, agonizingly aware of his presence, and now, finally, I could simply rest in it. I had found my ground. I had come home. Our new normal was a tapestry woven from small, domestic moments. It was the sight of his toothbrush next to mine in the bathroom, a small, plastic declaration of permanence. It was the easy way he navigated my kitchen, making coffee in the morning as if he had been doing it for years. It was me, clearing a shelf for him in my closet, an act that felt more significant than any spoken declaration of love. He was no longer a guest in my life. He was a resident. His life of perpetual motion began to slow, to find a new orbit around the quiet center we were creating. The consulting trips became shorter, less frequent. He started saying no to projects that would take him away for too long. He was choosing to be present, to be still. One Saturday afternoon, I was in my darkroom, the faint, acidic smell of fixer in the air, the soft red light casting an otherworldly glow on everything. I was developing photos from a recent street photography session. Leo came in, moving quietly, respecting the delicate process. He didn't speak, just stood behind me, watching as I gently agitated the tray, waiting for the image to emerge on the paper. It was a picture of an elderly couple on a park bench, their hands intertwined, their faces turned toward each other. A quiet, unassuming moment of lifelong connection. As the image slowly bloomed into existence, rising from the blank white paper like a memory surfacing, he rested his chin on my shoulder and wrapped his arms around my waist from behind. I leaned back into his embrace, the warmth of his body a welcome contrast to the cool, dark air of the room. "That's us," he whispered, his breath warm against my ear. "That's what I want. Not the big, loud wedding. Just that. The quiet part. The part that lasts." I turned my head and kissed him, a slow, deep kiss that tasted of chemicals and coffee and a future I was finally allowing myself to believe in. In the dim, red light of my darkroom, surrounded by the ghosts of images waiting to be born, we were developing our own picture, one that was becoming clearer and more beautiful with each passing day. The process was slow, deliberate, and required patience and care, but the image that was emerging was worth every moment of waiting, every moment of fear. Love, I have learned, is not always the grand, declarative gesture. It is not always the thunderclap or the lightning strike. Sometimes it is a process of slow, patient development in a quiet, darkened room. It is the courage to expose your most vulnerable self to the light, trusting that the person standing beside you will see the beauty in the raw, undeveloped image. It is the realization that a home is not a place, but a presence. It is the soft click of a door, not closing a chapter, but opening onto a room where you are finally, truly seen. It was a language I had always understood through my camera lens, the art of finding the profound in the ordinary. And with Leo, I was finally living it. We began to heal in the beautiful, honest silence we had learned to create together.